Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk about a few things in our artist masterclass. We're going to start with talking about tattoos, makeup layers, and the other features that we've actually introduced along the last couple of editor packs. That will be half the tutorial, and the other half we're going to cover doing skins. Now, I've actually already just quickly prepared a tattoo layer through the editor pack process. So I've actually got one I can show off very quickly, just to show off what a tattoo actually does. And this is a very simple one that I just put together a second ago. So I'll just release my screen. Now, as you can see on this particular avatar, we've actually got, this is my avatar. I've actually put two little marks of war paint down the side of the avatar's face. Now, basics of getting that set up is pretty straightforward. I've actually done this one in Substance Painter, and as you can see here, this is exactly the same model that I have just put together. So what we'll do today is we're actually going to cover off the process of actually getting a tattoo layer set up and how to actually import it into your scene. Now, tattoo layers can be more complex than this. This is a pretty straightforward, very, very basic tattoo. But we can actually embed things like normal map information. We can embed a lot of specularity information, so we can actually make something look metallic. So, for example, if we want to build a tattoo that looks like the effect you see in the Terminator 2 movie, where the metal gets sort of bursted out of the T-1000's skin, we can actually create a tattoo layer that will actually look like that, and that'll actually be one of the things we'll do today, just to showcase how to do that. But first things first, we actually just sort of get set up and good to go. So to do that, I'm just going to quickly log out of my editor view. We'll just go back to our normal project. So that's actually the live view. You get to see our special debugger. But I'm going to take a trip through the editor pack and a trip through Substance Painter. Now, you can use any texture editing tool you like. I happen to like using the Substance tools because they give you great previewing function feedback. If you want to do this in Photoshop, I'll also show the basics of how to do this in Photoshop. It's pretty straightforward. Now, this is my editor pack project. I've just upgraded this one to the 12.8 editor pack, which is available on the wiki. As you can see, there's not touching here, but what we have is if we search in the project view for 2017, you actually get access to our new character models. So we've got the new male one here, and we've also got the new female here as well. And you can actually compare and contrast them against the old ones. So if this is the first time seeing the new higher def avatars, that we can look at the old character models. So this was the old one. As you can see, it was quite low poly, whereas we've got the newer higher resolution ones, a bit smoother. The proportions and things are all the same. All the blend shapes and so forth are also the same, so all the body reshaping and stuff is compatible, and all the clothing is compatible with the extra polygons. It just adds a few more nice details around the edges. Now, to get this going, I'm going to do a quick tattoo in Substance Painter, and then we'll go over Photoshop, doing the same process in Photoshop. So what I'll do is I'm just going to start a new project, and for that I'm just going to throw this one away. Discard this. Now we're going to select... if you haven't used Substance Painter before, we're just going to select the Unity 5 template that they've got down the bottom here. We're going to select a mesh, and we're actually going to go pick out the 2017 model. So if we just go into the project view, sorry, wrong project open. We just right click on here, we can hit Show in Explorer or Show in Finder for Mac. We'll just go back to Substance Painter, we'll find the thing, and we'll just take the 2017 male, and we'll use that as our base today. Other than that, what we can also do is look at bringing in some texture. So we actually got the male in here as well. I think it's in the skeleton 3 folder, sorry, which is just a sum folder in here. I'm just going to bring in the male texture as well. And this is just the default male one we've got. Okay, now give that a second to cook. And here we go. We've got our base male in here, and we're just going to put the skin underneath just so we can actually see what's going on. So I'm just going to add a fill layer, and I'm going to set the base color to our male texture. I'm just going to lower the roughness to match our internal one. Internally, our roughness is about 0.7. That somewhat approximates human skin. So as you can see here, we've got our base male. Now, this process can also be used for building skins. The benefit of doing skins this way is that you don't need to upload a shader with your skin. Now, we'll cover that in a little bit towards the second half of this tutorial, because we will make a more interesting character that actually uses a custom shader, because that's always kind of cool to see. But you can use this process of skins, and in fact, any skin designers going forward, I would recommend you go this path, and that's because if we make changes to the base avatar's shaders, so for instance, we upgrade to a new, even more modern skin shader on our characters, then your skins will continue working. You won't need to re-upload them. That will improve the quality of your skins over time. So it's just something to recommend, is that if you are a skin designer, uploading them as a tattoo layer is in fact a really good idea. Now, the basics of getting started here, we need to add an opacity layer to Substance Painter. Now, this is something that I didn't figure out for a while, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Down here, by the default, you've got this texture set settings. You need to add an opacity, which is transparency channel. So you just click the little plus next to channels. We'll click opacity. And there, now we've actually got the ability to paint opacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a new, I'm just going to set the fill layer of this one's opacity to black. You won't actually see it in the editor, but it is there. And now when we actually paint, we'll be able to paint with the opacity separated, and that will mean it'll be cleaner and actually come through without us having to build an alpha map for it by hand. So we'll just add a layer into here, and now I'm thinking that we'll go straight into the metallic blob that we were talking before. So I'm just going to find a nice impact of some sort. I'm sure there's one in here somewhere. That coffee circle, but it's not quite. Yeah, that'll do. That can be made into a nice nice smear. So what we might do is we are going to just paint on this and make it actually metallic. So I'm going to make the metallic quite high. I'm going to make that fully metallic, and I'm going to make that quite smooth, and that'll give it a nice reflection. So if I paint that onto there, you can sort of see that we've got that effect in there. Now that's not going to really do the same job as if we need to add height into this as well. So I'm just going to set the height down so it actually gets a puncture. There we go. And now we've got something. Now we can actually paint this whole thing out into a tattoo layer, pretty straightforward. Not too much to the process. All we have to do is I'm going to take this fill layer, I'm going to hide it. I'm just going to replace it with another fill layer that's just got 0 transparency, just for the sake of this. So opacity down to black to hide it. And I'm going to export the textures. Now, exporting the textures, there is a particular trick here. Normally, you traditionally work with standard metallic for your shader pipeline in Unity, especially when you're working with Substance Painter. One thing to note here is that the avatar skins do not follow a standard metallic pattern. They, in fact, follow standard specular. And the reason we do that is because human skin tones get a little bit more specular expression using the full specular pipeline. They don't quite map to the metallic pipeline as nicely. So we do use the standard specular for skin. So you just need to change the configuration from standard metallic to standard specular. When we export this, we should see them all. We've got the transparency, the specular and smoothness, we've got the normal map. We've got an emission map there, although we're not using it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to export this one as is. I'm going to create a new folder for this. I'm just going to call this test 3. And we're going to be able to export this pretty quickly. So I'll just export. And when we go into this, we should have a folder with albedo and transparency. Yep, so when we open this up, we should have some transparency visible. I don't know if we've actually got... Oh, I may have done something stupid. Sorry, this is my fault. We might need to just redo this pattern because I forgot to mark the opacity when I was painting. Be careful there. So let's delete that layer and we'll quickly repaint it. So I'm going to paint, add a layer. I'm going to add opacity. And I'm going to set the fill color down to black. Oh, sorry, to white, so it actually is opaque. And then I'm just going to paint right there. There we go. All right, now we export the textures again. All the settings should be the same, folders the same, so just hit OK. And now when we go into here, yes, now we can see that there is actually our little map down there. Okay, so this is all we need to do in order to get this uploaded. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder in here somewhere. I'm going to create this one for, let's see, little impact. I'm going to go into folder, show and explorer, and I'm just going to drag and drop these files into the project. Okay, we should have all these bits and pieces in. So we've got our specular map, which is going to indicate that's quite shiny, which is going to come through because it's metal, and our albedo and transparency. As you can see, we can see our transparency there. Normal map. Now we're just going to set the normal map to actually be a normal map, so it's processed correctly. So just change the texture type from default to normal map. Click apply, and there we go. That will cover that. Now, to actually get this uploaded as a tattoo, we just create a new clothing item. So we create an empty object. We're going to attach clothing item, and and we're going to set this one to male because that's what it's been set for. I'm going to tag over to skin. I'm just click only contain skin. Now that's not something you necessarily will need to do in the future. There is a little bit of a bug there that we need to solve, but that is important when uploading tattoos. Just tick the only contain skin part. Now we go to the tattoo tab. And we've got a whole bunch of slots here that matter for tattoos. So we've got the albedo, that's the underlying texture. So you can see this one's the albedo and transparency, so I'll just drop that in. We have metal smoothness, that actually should be labeled specular smoothness, so that's something else I need to fix, but just drop that one into that slot. And then finally we've got the normal map. Now we're going to set the type of this one to tattoo. Doesn't really matter, that's mostly for user interface and what icon will display in an upcoming version of the user interface for the outfit window. It'll also determine what order it will default place in when it comes in. So like for instance base skin, makeup, tattoo, and overlay, those are sort of going up to down order. We've got the blend. Now we can use Photoshop blend layers here, or similar to the Photoshop blend layers, so we can actually make these, for instance, the additive. So we can actually make it brighten the texture. We can do multiplicative, so we can actually sort of burn the skin layers underneath. So you can use all those little things, and that would be more useful if you're doing things like makeup. However, we're just going to use normal for now, so that's just standard transparency. We're going to tick enabled. Now the transparency for the metalness and the specular and the normal, that actually comes off the albedo. So the albedo's transparency will be reused on those other maps, so they don't need to have alpha maps of their own. Finally, that's all we need to do here. So we're just going to virtual good. Good, and we're just going to set this to clothing, so let's click fix. I'm going to set this to a category. I'm going to say clothes, skin, tattoos, ratings everyone. Just say this one's metal tattoo, shiny metal. Pricing, just mark that not for sale. I'm going to ignore the icons for now because this is just going to my personal inventory on the creator server. I'm just going to set that to... Okay. Alright, that should be good to go. So what we're just going to do is just give that a name. Drag it into the project view so it gets saved to disk. And then finally, I'm just click the upload tab and click submit. That is all that's required to get a tattoo up and running. It's pretty straightforward. That will get that will process fairly quickly. These do tend to be quite small files. They usually don't take more than a minute to actually process through. They're quite quick. Now, one of the more interesting things here we can do here with these tattoo layers is we can actually combine them with other settings. So, for instance, say you've got a hair, for example. Hair is a very good example. And you want the hair to actually darken the skin around the head. So, for instance, you want to actually tint the skin color around the hairline in order to match the hair color. That actually is something that you can build in addition. So if you've got a clothing item, you can actually just tick the enabled tattoo layer, and that will work in conjunction with your clothing item. So whether the clothing item is worn, the tattoo will be applied automatically. So that can be a rather useful feature for a wide variety of clothing items, depending on sort of what you're doing with the clothing item. But if you ever do want to modify the base avatar texture when it's been worn, this will do it for you. Okay, so that one is a pretty straightforward guide to getting a tattoo layer up. Again, the process is pretty straightforward, so there's not a whole lot we need to go into, but what we can discuss is actually how to do this stuff by hand in Photoshop. So the way to do it in Photoshop is almost identical, and this may be easier for people more familiar with Photoshop, so I'll just pull out the male texture. As we can see here, we got that one. I'm just going to open this in Photoshop. And this is what we're going to use as the basics for our own tattoo layer. So I'm just going to create a new layer. I'm going to paint some stuff on here. Say, for instance, we're going to change the eye colors. We can do that through a tattoo layer. Pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to select this inner eye section. I think it's about the right size. Expand that by 2 pixels. No, I need to expand by 1. Now I'm going to make this eye neon pink. It's like a shade of broken color actually. I will only do 1 color eye. colors. So the other one's going to be the normal color. Now we'll just save that out. In fact, I'm just going to copy merged that one into a new layer. Oops. Copy merged. Okay. All right. So we've now got our Photoshop layer. It's a pretty straightforward one. Again, what we're just going to do is we're going to go to the folder here. I'm just going to make a new one. This is going to be I'm just going to save this one as a texture format that supports transparency. PSD will do here. So pick eye tattoo. Now, if you don't have all the maps, you don't actually need them. In fact, if you're not using other maps, then there's no point actually including them in your tattoo layer. So I'm just going to go again, create new clothing item. I'll just click skin, make sure I only click skins, tattoo, skeleton for this one is again male. So tattoo, I'm just going to set this to tattoo, normal, enabled, and then finally I should have my pink eye tattoo. Just verify that looks correct, but it does. Okay, again, virtual good. Just to give it a store listing. Clothing, skin, tattoos. Okay, finally, I think that will be the right eye, but I'm not sure. Again, not for sale. Icons and auto obviously line. Yep. Okay, and the name of your game object doesn't actually matter when you upload it. Just for reference, I'm just doing it because it's easier to find it later on if you want to use it. So there we go. That's a pretty straightforward process. Now for skins, if you're going to redo a whole skin, you could go through the same process. You pretty much just don't use the alpha layer. You keep it completely opaque. And in that case, you can just use that as a block out layer in order to make your own skins. Tattoos ordering, as far as layering goes, that is to say what order they apply in, because obviously some of them have various blends. They follow two simple rules. The first is that it'll run from the type, top to bottom. So base skin will always be rendered underneath everything else. Skin will then be rendered over the top of that. Makeup, tattoo, and overlay will be the order it actually happens in. That's the first control. The second control is the order the user actually equips them in. That is to say that the last equipped item will always be on top after applying these rules. So that if you're wearing two base skins, then the last one will be applied as the most visible, or most recently visible one. There is no real limits apart from the global item limit on how many of these you can wear at once. There is a global item limit that says an avatar can't wear more than, I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20 clothing items simultaneously. That will include tattoo layers, but besides that limit, there really isn't too much in the way of other limits in terms of how they work. Okay, so next thing that I wanted to come on to was actually building new skins from scratch. Now, what I might do is I might actually go back into Substance Painter. I'm going to paint a more interesting base skeleton. So we're actually going to do something. I did one a while ago. It sort of ended up in the shop, and it kind of ended up a little bit broken because we changed some UV layouts a very, very long time ago. So I'm going to create a new project. Actually, I'll just reuse this one. No harm in it. It's already loaded in. So we'll just assume all these layers are gone. Now we'll just leave this one here for previewing. So what I might do is I might make a bit of an interesting skin, and then I might wrap a custom shader into it to make it a little bit more interesting still. So I might do a clone of something I did before. So we're going to make a robot. And that robot hopefully will be kind of interesting. So we'll create a fill layer. No, I'll do a folder first. So I'll do a folder, and add a mask to that, a black mask. Fill to this. Now I usually do things this way because it gives you quite a lot of power later on in terms of how the stuff actually renders. So I'm going to by putting it into folders and things, we can actually sort of change these parameters later quite quickly and easily. So I'm going to add a smart material inside there. So I might start with aluminium. I'm just going to drop that in. Now that's generator, we're going to swap. We'll just keep messing with this. It'll take a couple of minutes to get something that looks good, but once we do, the results should be worth it. So I'm just going to okay, so I'm going to start with a dark metal, so I'm just going to darken this one down. It's an aluminium base. I'm just going to change that color. Make a golden black robot. So a new layer, new black mask. This one we're going to go with some golden. It's not rough at all, so it's going to be very shiny, metallic. And here I'm going to add a fill. Sorry, add a paint. I'll add a. Oops. Now, UV fill somewhere around here. Otherwise, black. I think just the area I want is just this section up here. Okay. And we might fill, paint. We do something a little bit more interesting. And now that color's probably slightly off, so we'll just change that a little bit. Just get the right material, in fact. That's been interesting. I'll take that one. That's usually one of my favorites to sort of work with as a base. Let's check the colors. Fill this up, black mask. This below. Add paint. And Now I might actually use this opacity layer that we've got available to us to actually paint some effects into this, and we'll use this as part of a custom shader that can be uploaded with the skin. So what we're going to do is maybe I'll make this section a bit of an opacity of full, and then this section down here I'm just going to set a new fill layer. It's going to do nothing except set the opacity down. Now the reason we're just doing that is because it comes in as an alpha channel, and the alpha channel can be read by the shader. So now immediately we've got this golden section is actually accessible to our shader when we actually write one in. So I think this guy might be good to go. So I'm just going to export this, and we're going to use the old skin process here because that's going to let us upload a custom shader with the object. Now, for those who aren't familiar with what a shader is basically a small program that runs on the graphics card, and it tells the graphics card this is how I want this material to actually appear. This is the rendering routine we use to render it. And that means you can take control of things like lighting, all sorts of things that are non-realistic effects can be done through a custom shader. And we did cover shaders a little bit before in a previous masterclass, but it is always good to just sort of refresh what shaders can do, especially now that the new version of Unity that we'll be upgrading to later this year, 2018, has a built-in shader editor that's visual, so you actually don't need to do any coding at all to be able to build custom shaders. Also, you can reuse shaders that other people have given you, so if someone's built you a shader, you can reuse that in other projects. They're not sort of tied to the models or the textures, although they may imply certain ways of working with them. Okay, so I'm just going to export this guy. And we should have our thing, so let's have a look at him. So we've got it's got specular, so I'm just going to change the workflow here because we don't need to be working in standard specular. We'll work standard metallic because it's easier. So let's go back to that. Just going to re-export. Okay, now we've got that all in. So I'm just going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this Robot 2. Now, Robot 2 is going to need a little bit of previewing work while we work on how he's going to look. So I'm just going to grab a male 2017 character, so bring him into the scene. Now this is a fairly neutral scene. I don't even know we've baked any reflection probes in here, so we may not be able to see much in this scene. I'll just check. We haven't. We haven't. I'm just going to add one in because it will make this look a bit more interesting. So I'm just going to add a while we preview. And this is important. Reflection probes actually do add a lot as far as PBR materials. So when you're building scenes, it's a good idea to place them around the place because they'll give you a lot more oomph in your visuals. So I'm just going to set the scale of this one to 1000. Okay. Whoops. And bake. And now we know that the terrain was originally shiny because it is now very shiny. But that also means that we're going to preview this guy. So I think it was Robot we called him. Robot 2, yes. I'm just going to create new material. Call this Robot Skin. I'm just going to start dropping these slots in. So I'm going to set the Robot Skin there. The metallic and smoothness goes to there. The normal goes to there. And that should be good now. I should actually put that on here. We've got our metallic robot in here. Now the better the quality of the reflections, the more realistic this is going to look. So as you can see here, the reflections aren't particularly good because it's all reflecting just white. So there's no interesting reflections coming in, but you can at least partially see, particularly from that angle, for example, that there is those metallic highlights coming in there. Now this is only the basics of what we're going to do with this guy. We're actually going to make him a bit more interesting with the shader. So I'm just going to create a new shader. And to do that, I'm just going to create a new standard surface shader. I'm going to call this Robot Skin Shader. Now, when you double click that, it's just going to fire up Visual Studio, which has got built-in source highlighting for shaders now, which makes life easier for everyone. Just refill my drink. Okay. Now, for those who haven't played around with shaders before, this is code, but it's a little bit easier than most kinds because it's very forgiving of mistakes. So I'm just going to start playing around with this a little bit to make it more visually interesting. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start playing around with the emission. So I'm going to set o.emission equals float 3. So that's just saying we're going to go to color. I'm going to say it's going to emit in red. Now I'm going to change this material to use that shader. So it'll show up under custom, and then we've got robot skin shader. So now it's actually going to emit in red. So if this scene gets particularly dark, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do that. It's a little bit harder to do. I have to change the default skybox and add one in, but this guy will always glow even if it's in the dark because it's got emission. That is to say, he's a light emitting surface right now. Now he's emitting uniformly a red color on everything. We could make that match the texture that we brought in. So if you remember beforehand, we actually brought in the alpha of this one, and it's got an alpha channel indicating just the gold areas. So what we can do is we make that emit just on the gold areas. To do that, we just take in the alpha channel of our texture. I'm just going to say multiply that by the one we brought in there. I'll just bring in the alpha channel. And here we go. Now I've got glow in the dark red, red highlights on there. Now again, that's pretty straightforward. It's not terribly interesting yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to dress this up with a secondary texture. So I'm going to make a texture because I don't think I've got one handy. It's going to have lines in it. And it's going to be a really straightforward texture. It's going to be quite thin but quite high. So I'll set this to be 4 pixels wide, and it's going to be 128 pixels high. I'm going to make this black. This is going to be a simple black and white texture. We could do colors and things, but we won't. And I'm just going to add a little bit of white to this. I'm going to blur it. Add a couple of smaller lines doing the same thing. So this screen. The key thing is I just want this to be looping, tileable. Okay, just got something there, and we're going to use this as the basis of a hologram effect. I'm going to save this into the same directory for consistency. Oops. Apparently my keyboard was reset to British. Thank you guys. Robot, and we're going to call this Robot 2 Highlight. And that's fine. It's going to repeat, otherwise be good. So I've got that highlight texture. I'm just going to add the texture now to the shader, and to do that I just need to declare it. So I'm just going to add a new highlight. I cannot type today. Now, if this all looks confusing, there is some fantastic tutorials on the Unity website on how to actually work with building custom shaders. They really do teach the basics. I've been doing this for several years, so this is all quite natural, but it's not actually that hard to pick up if you want to do it for yourself. So I'm just going to bring this texture in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to multiply it by the world position. So I'm also going to bring in the world position. So say float 3 world pos. And that means we can do effects based on the position of the object in the scene. So we're going to go fixed for highlight. Equals text to be. And we'll do highlight texture, and we'll go in.uv highlight texture, and then we're going to add some things to this. We might add plus float to 0, and we'll add the in.worldpos.y. Okay, so now we should have our highlight texture. We can bring that one we just brought in into our thing, and I'm just going to multiply this again by the highlight textures red. Actually, I'll highlight entirely. Okay. Actually, so just the RGB. Now we should have the slot for an extra texture, so we'll just drop that in. And you can see we've got our bands. Now this is going to be quite, as we move this up, you'll see that it's got that, it's actually interacting with the position of the object in the world. So as the object moves around, the highlight texture changes with it. Now we've actually rigged this one up so it follows the tiling, so I can actually do like that, for example. Not enough. Now, the way we've rigged this one has been that it's tied to the UV coordinates. As you can see, it's sort of rough, and that probably isn't ideal. So I'm going to strip that out and just go entirely on the world position. And I'm going to multiply that by about 20. And when you edit, you can actually sort of just tab back into Unity to get that information. So here we go, we've got that. Now that's, again, pretty basic. That's not really that interesting yet, but we can make it more interesting by start adding things like time into this mix. So I'm going to add also to that, I'm going to add the time. And that's not doing a whole lot, so we'll do this. So that's now an animated material that's attached to the character, and this will obviously follow along as the character moves around in the scene. So that time, I'm going to make that. Now, the next thing we'll probably want to play with is how this actually interacts with post effects. So post effects in the scene sort of indicate some sort of fancy pants camera effects that can go on. Now, do I have a camera in this scene? I do not. So I'm just going to add a camera to this scene so we can actually preview how this is going to look. We're going to post behavior. I'm just going to create a new post profile. This is going to be bloom post, just to preview a simple bloom effect. This is something that's going to be set up in most scenes already. So I'll just go to that camera, on the bloom post, and now we can sort of see how there's a little bit of bloom here. Now bloom is dictated by how much sort of overpowering color there is on the screen. So something that's very bright will bloom, and to do that we can actually make this emission brighter. So I can actually times that by 20, for example. And we'll get a really overwhelming glow that's getting attached to it. Now that's probably a bit too much, but it sort of gives you an idea of the effect. So I might bring that down to 8, for example. Still a little bit too much. And here we go, now I've got something that's a little bit more. Now, we can make this effect look a bit more ethereal if we start playing with, for instance, the camera position. So, go through float 3 view. Now, this is the view direction against the normal of the object. What we can do is we can go, we'll create a multiplier. Yes, I'm going to silly not to push that button, because I have done something very foolish. No, I do not want to hit play. There we go. Okay, so we're going to hit the dot product of the in position, the view direction, and the o dot normal, which is the normal position of the object. And I'm going to multiply that by. Okay, that didn't have a whole lot of an impact yet. What we will see is it's actually gone away from the tops and the bottoms, but you can't quite see that very well. So we're just going to make that a little bit more pronounced. Set that to power. This is just a simple Fresnel effect. Now let's set to 1.0 minus. Saturate. So we get to fiddle around with these parameters and things until we get sort of various effects we want. I was hoping that would be a little bit more pronounced. And I think there actually is. So if we go to these surface shader examples, well, we might just pull off the Fresnel effect I use because it does work quite well. And this is not something to be afraid of. If you don't, if you figure out something, it's pretty easy to pull this up. So here we go, rim lighting. They normalize the view direction first. In fact, I'm just going to go with here. We'll set it to power. There we go. So now it's actually only showing on the outer edges, like away from the camera. So it's just a simple effect we could do. We can now make this a bit more powerful, I think, to ramp up the lower display detail. Now, if you don't want that red, we could then sort of tint the colors. We can add colors into here. So actually, we've got a color property already. So what was that, the second one? And we'll be just about ready to upload this one. So I'm just going to add that and you. And instead of red, we actually just say it's going to be there. So now we can actually tint this in world or in our Unity editor. So if we don't like it being white, we can change the color, red or anything else. Oh, finally, I need to rig up that texture, but I'm just not going to bother too much. So this is the basics of our robot. We have got this skin. Now to upload a skin that's got a custom shader, for instance, like this one, we just, again, similar process to before. We add a clothing component. We attach a skin. We set this to only contain skin, and we just drag the skin into the material slot. So just click add material slot if you don't have one. Add a robot skin. We'll just tick it to occupy the slot for skins, which is the skin base. So it's just there on there. And we'll set this one as its base male because that's where we've rigged it to. That should be all that's required for uploading the skin. So I'm just going to add all the other settings you can ignore. This is clothing. This will be under skins, clothes, skin, general. So robot skin. Robot skin 2, and this is the new one. I'm going to set this one actually so it does go up. I'm just going to set it as a freebie. Although I do need to take icons and things, so I might just leave that off and we can upload it later. Okay, author SWE. And we'll just drag this one in. This is our robot skin. Select that and upload. Again, this one should be a fairly small upload because it's only got a couple of textures attached to it. There we go. Pretty straightforward one. So that's the process of working with skins. You can see some of the basics of the power of being able to play with custom shaders attached to your skins if you want to. That's a more sophisticated feature. But the process of getting basic tattoos and things uploaded is a much simpler process that you can get started with straight away. So if you're interested in doing that, you really only need some very rudimentary Photoshop skills to be able to upload tattoos, and then they can be worn on your avatar, sold through the store, and all the rest of it. Hopefully that was a useful tutorial, and if there's anything that anyone has, please feel free to reach out with questions. And if you are hovering around, we will be doing our in-world technical office hours in about 5 minutes in the Welcome Center. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully that was a useful tutorial. And next week, I promise we will get to the Demolition Derby. You can already see that we've got some bits and pieces coming out here that will be quite interesting to play with when we're getting around to it next week. Okay, thank you all, and I will see you all next week.